The Tengu's Magic Cape by Japanese Folktales. Brought to you by TellStory.net, stories from around the world. In the ancient city of Kyoto, where temple bells echoed through narrow streets and mist-shrouded mountains loomed beyond the rooftops, there lived a boy named Kei who was known throughout his neighborhood for his clever schemes and mischievous nature. From the time Kei was small, he had heard stories of the Tengu, mysterious creatures that dwelled in the mountain forests surrounding the city. These beings were said to have bright red faces, long beak-like noses, and powerful wings that let them soar through the treetops. They carried magical fans called hachua, which they used to stir up fierce winds and play tricks on unsuspecting humans. The Tengu were also known to possess people, and most children feared even speaking their names aloud. But as Kei grew older, his mischievous nature overcame any fear he might have felt. Instead of avoiding thoughts of the Tengu, he grew curious about them. He would listen intently whenever the village elders shared tales of Tengu encounters, memorizing every detail about their powers and possessions. One day, Kei overheard a particularly fascinating story about a famous Tengu, said to be the ghost of an ancient emperor, who owned a magical straw cloak unlike any other. This straw cloak, when worn, could make its wearer completely invisible to all eyes. The story captivated Kei's imagination, and from that moment forward, he could think of little else.
Imagine the tricks I could play with such a cloak. I could sneak into the finest restaurants and eat all the delicacies I wanted. I could wander through the governor's mansion and see treasures no common person ever glimpses. No one would ever catch me.
The more Kei thought about the magical straw cloak, the more determined he became to possess it. But how could a mere boy steal something from a powerful Tengu? The creatures were cunning and dangerous, capable of reading human thoughts and seeing through most deceptions. Kei puzzled over this problem for many months, thinking and planning until finally, one spring morning, an idea struck him with such force that he laughed aloud.
Of course. The Tengu may be powerful, but they are also proud and curious. I'll use that against them.
On a beautiful spring day, when cherry blossoms drifted through the air like snow and birds sang in the branches, Kei prepared for his adventure. He took a simple bamboo rod, nothing more than a hollow piece of bamboo used for fencing, and set out toward the mountains. The climb was long and steep, and by the time Kei reached the summit, the sun had passed its peak and begun its descent toward the horizon. But his efforts were rewarded when he spotted a group of Tengu gathered in a clearing not far from where he stood. Kei took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. Then, holding the bamboo rod up to his eye as if it were some kind of viewing instrument, he began to exclaim loudly.
Remarkable! Simply remarkable! I can see everything through this magical device. The villages spread out below like toys. The harbor ships far in the distance. Even Mount Fuji gleaming in the sunset.
The Tengu, who had been engaged in their own activities, stopped and stared at the strange boy who was making such extraordinary claims. Their red faces wrinkled with curiosity, and they whispered among themselves.
What could this human child be looking at?
Is that truly a magical instrument?
Kei continued his performance, describing imaginary sights with such enthusiasm and detail that even he almost believed his own lies.
I can see the emperor's palace. I can count the tiles on the temple roofs. This is the most wonderful device in all of Japan.
Finally, the Tengu with the hiding straw cloak, a particularly large creature with a nose that curved like a hawk's beak, could contain his curiosity no longer. He stepped forward, his voice fierce and commanding.
Boy, let me see through that device.
Kei lowered the bamboo and pretended to consider the request carefully.
Well, I suppose I might let you try it. But what will you give me in return? This bamboo is precious to me.
The Tengu puffed up with pride.
I will let you wear my hiding straw cloak. When you wear this cloak, no one can see you at all. You become as invisible as the wind.
He declared, lifting up the garment for Kay to see. It was a strange thing, worn and dirty from years of use, but Kay's heart raced at the sight of it.
That dirty old thing? How do I know it even works?
Kay pretended to be unimpressed.
It works. It is one of the most powerful magical objects in these mountains.
Very well, I'll trade you. But just for a little while.
The exchange was made. Kay handed the hollow bamboo rod to the eager Tengu, and in return, he received the magical hiding straw cloak. His hands trembled slightly as he took it, though he tried to maintain his casual expression. The Tengu immediately raised the bamboo to his eye and peered through it. He looked left, then right, then turned in circles, searching desperately for the marvelous visions the boy had described. But of course, he saw nothing except what anyone could see through an empty bamboo tube. Perhaps a slightly framed view of the ordinary landscape, but certainly nothing magical.
How does it work? I don't see anything special.
But when he turned to ask Kay for instructions, the boy had vanished completely. The moment Kay had pulled the straw cloak over his shoulders, he had become invisible, and he had wasted no time in racing back down the mountain path. Kay ran as fast as his legs would carry him, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had done it. He had actually tricked a Tengu and stolen its magical cape. Behind him, he could hear the creature's angry roars echoing across the mountainside, but Kay was already too far away to be caught. By the time he reached the city, Kay was breathless but triumphant. Still wearing the cape and therefore still invisible, he made his way straight to his favorite bake shop, where the most wonderful sweets and treats were displayed in the window. Kay walked right past the shopkeeper, who never even glanced in his direction. The cape worked perfectly. Kay began to help himself to the delicious offerings: sweet mochi filled with red bean paste, delicate cookies dusted with sugar, rice cakes wrapped in bamboo leaves. He ate one after another, savoring each bite while the shopkeeper and customers went about their business, completely unaware of his presence. Kay ate until his stomach was so full he could barely walk. Finally, stuffed with sweets and giddy with success, he made his way home and collapsed into bed, still wearing the magical cape. He fell asleep immediately, dreaming of all the wonderful tricks he would play in the days to come. The next morning, Kay woke with a smile on his face, already planning his next adventure. But when he reached to adjust the cape around his shoulders, he found nothing there. Panic seized him as he leaped out of bed and searched frantically through his blankets and around the room.
Mother! Have you seen my cape? The one I was wearing last night?
His mother, who was busy preparing breakfast over the fire, waved a hand dismissively.
Oh, that filthy old rag? Really, Kay, where did you find such a dirty thing? It was so worn and stained that I threw it into the fire and burned it. You should be more careful about what you bring into this house.
You burned it?
Kay's voice rose to a wail. He rushed to the fire and saw only the last remnants of the magical cape turning to ash and drifting up with the smoke. For a moment, Kay felt as if his world had ended. All his planning, all his cleverness, and his mother had simply burned away his prize without a second thought. But then, as he stared at the gray ashes in the fire, another idea began to form. If the cape made him invisible, perhaps the ashes would too. It was worth trying. Quickly, before his mother could stop him, Kay scooped up handfuls of ash and began rubbing them all over his body. His arms, his legs, his face, his hair. The ashes stuck to his skin and clothes, covering him in a layer of gray dust. His mother turned from her cooking and gasped.
Kay, what are you doing? You're making a terrible mess.
But she was speaking to empty air. Kay had disappeared once again. The ashes worked just as well as the cape had. Delighted, Kay slipped out of the house before his mother could figure out what had happened. Today, Kay decided he would aim higher than a simple bake shop. He had heard that the governor was hosting a grand feast that very afternoon. Important officials from across the region would be attending, and the finest foods and delicacies would be served. What better way to test his new method of invisibility? Kay made his way across the city to the governor's mansion, a magnificent building surrounded by high walls and beautiful gardens. The guards at the gate never saw him pass, and he walked right into the great hall where the feast was being prepared. Long tables were laden with every imaginable delicacy. Steaming rice, grilled fish arranged in elaborate patterns, vegetables carved into decorative shapes, soups in fine ceramic bowls, fruits, sweets, and delicate pastries. Kay's eyes widened at the sight, and his stomach rumbled despite having eaten so much the night before. As the guests began to arrive and take their seats, Kay positioned himself near the largest table and began to sample the feast. A piece of fish here, a rice ball there, a sip from a cup of sweet plum wine. Everything was delicious, even better than he had imagined. But Kay was so focused on eating that he failed to notice what was happening to his disguise. The ashes that covered his body were beginning to fall away, drifting down to the floor like gray snow with every movement he made. The guests, engaged in conversation and enjoying their meal, gradually became aware that something strange was happening. Dishes seemed to be emptying themselves. Cups floated in the air and then returned to the table. A rice ball vanished from a plate as they watched.
What sorcery is this?
Is there a ghost among us?
The whispers grew louder, and people began to point and stare. Some of the braver guests rose from their seats and began following the mysterious disturbances, watching in fascination as another dish emptied itself before their eyes. Kay, absorbed in eating a particularly delicious sweet, suddenly realized people were moving toward him, their eyes fixed on the space he occupied. Panic gripped him. He looked down and saw patches of his skin showing through where the ashes had fallen away. They were beginning to see him. Without thinking, Kay bolted. He ran through the great hall and burst out through the doors into the governor's garden. Behind him, he could hear shouts of alarm and the sound of guards being summoned. The garden was magnificent but offered little cover. Carefully trimmed bushes, decorative stones, and a few ornamental trees. But beyond the garden wall rose a thick forest of tall trees, their branches heavy with spring leaves. Kay scrambled over the wall and plunged into the woods, searching desperately for a hiding place. What Kay did not know was that this forest was the very edge of the Tengu's mountain territory. The Tengu who had been tricked the day before had not given up their search. Furious at being deceived, several of them had been combing the area around the city, hoping to find the boy who had stolen their precious straw cloak. When they heard the commotion from the governor's mansion, the shouts, the clattering of guards' armor, the excited voices, their keen ears perked up. They glided silently through the treetops to investigate. Kay found a dense thicket and crouched down, trying to catch his breath and stay as still as possible. He could hear the guards searching the garden, calling out to one another. But then another smell caught his attention, a strange, musky scent he didn't recognize. High above in the trees, the Tengu had caught a different scent. Their noses, far more sensitive than any humans, detected something familiar. The distinct smell of their magical straw cloak, now transformed into ash but still carrying traces of its ancient power.
There! I smell our cloak's magic.
One Tengu whispered to the others, pointing down at the thicket. They peered down and saw the faint traces of gray ash on the leaves and ground where Kay was hiding. Understanding dawned on their red faces, and they grinned wickedly at one another. So the boy thought he could use the remains of their cape to continue his tricks? One of the Tengu spotted a large wooden bucket near the garden wall. Left there by the gardeners, it was still full of water from that morning's work. With supernatural strength, the Tengu lifted the heavy bucket and carried it up into the tall tree directly above Kay's hiding place. Kay, thinking he had evaded both the guards and anyone else, began to relax slightly. Perhaps the ashes would keep him safe until nightfall, when he could sneak away. That's when the entire bucket of water came crashing down upon him. The deluge was sudden and complete. Water cascaded over Kay's head, his shoulders, his entire body, washing away every trace of ash in an instant. He sputtered and gasped, completely drenched and now completely visible. Before he could even think of running, the guards burst through the bushes. They had been drawn by the sound of the splash and now found themselves staring at a thoroughly soaked boy covered in streaks of wet ash, his clothes still bearing crumbs from the stolen feast.
There's the thief.
One guard shouted. Above in the trees, the Tengu watched with satisfaction as Kay was seized by the guards. Their laughter, high-pitched and eerie, echoed through the forest, though the humans below couldn't quite tell where it was coming from. Kay was dragged back to the governor's mansion, where he faced not only the anger of the governor but the shame of being caught in such a ridiculous state. The governor ordered him to be caned for his theft and trespassing, and Kay endured the punishment in front of all the assembled guests. But far worse than the physical pain was the humiliation. Everyone stared at him, the foolish boy who had thought himself so clever. And above it all, Kay could swear he still heard that eerie laughter from the forest. As he limped home afterward, wet, sore, and utterly defeated, Kay finally understood. He had thought he was so clever to trick a Tengu, but they had been watching, waiting, and in the end, they had made certain he learned his lesson in the most humiliating way possible. From that day forward, whenever Kay felt the urge to play tricks or scheme for things that weren't his, he remembered the feeling of that cold water crashing down upon him and the Tengu's laughter in the trees. He remembered the shame and the pain, and he thought of the old saying he had heard but never truly understood until now. Never tangle with a Tengu.